Hi, Latiefa.
Hi, Seth.
So nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Kobus, how are you?
Chef, fine and you. Good to meet you.
Very good to meet you too. I hope you're ready for my questions.
Oh, we're always ready.
Because I'm the most curious person you'll ever know, and I know very little about farming. So I just want to start from the top. One of my biggest confusion, what is regenerative farming? What is the future of farming? What is organic farming? How do these things play together? And am I confused? Are they the same thing? Are they all different?
Well, they're slightly different, nuanced rather is the right word. So farming for the future is regenerative agriculture. And farming is basically you plant something into the ground, you nurture it and you watch it grow and you try and sort of reap the rewards in terms of the fruits that it brings to the fore. So in our world, our Farming for the Future, which is our regenerative agriculture program, it's really a science-based management program, and it really looks and focuses on reversing the impact that farming has had on the ecosystem. It really looks at improving the water cycle and really looks at nurturing and the wellness of the soil and looking at the total ecosystem in that regard.
Nice. I thought Kobus was the farmer, but you seem to know a lot about farming. So, Latiefa, tell me about you. What do you do? How do you know so much?
Well, first I've got to say Kobus has taught me well over the years.
Good, good.
I'm the Chief Food Technology and Sustainability Officer for our foods business, and I know it sounds at Woolworths, and I know it sounds like a mouthful, but in actual fact, I look after the quality, food safety, and sustainability portfolio for foods.
Okay. So on a day-to-day basis, what does that mean to me as a consumer?
On a day-to-day basis, gosh. So I'm privileged. I've got a number of scientists, technologists, aquaculturists, agronomists that all supports me. And we basically look after a whole host of sustainability aspects. We look at food safety, legislation, impacts, policies, guidelines, etc. But if we think about farming per se and regenerative agriculture, what that really means for our consumer is that we've applied science and thought in terms of your produce that we put forward and how we make sure it's as sustainable as possible and that we leave minimum impact onto the planet by virtue of doing that business.
See, I am, as a consumer, those are a lot of words, but I'm sure by the end of this, I'll understand a bit more. So, Kobus, break it down for me slightly more to just in more layman's terms. What should I be understanding about regenerative farming?
Regenerative agriculture and regenerative farming is about reversing the damage we've done in the past. So if you look from 1950s, a lot of change in the world. We've built a number of dams, communication technologies came up, our emissions into the atmosphere increased. So we became a modern species, but at that came a price. So we've done a lot of damage, I believe unknowingly, not intentionally. We don't want to damage our own. We only have one, so we need to look after it. So now, after a couple of decades in the agriculture space, we saw that there is mitigation strategies against it, so that we can fix what we've damaged. The big problem is you need to do it in the context of your farm, and that's where regenerative agriculture is very important. You need to look at the farm, so it's not looking at a specific crop. It is where you're based, how's your climate looking, what's your resources you've got, what's your knowledge on your farm. And you need to build something that is special for that specific farm. That's why when people ask me, what is your guideline or your tick box for regenerative agriculture, I can't give it to them. It all depends where they are and what they farm with and what's the resources to their disposal. So regenerative agriculture is following that we need to have a specific outcome over time because we don't have much time. Climate change is upon us. It touches everybody. So we need to push really hard, but we need to prioritize what's important to do first. Because there's a sequence in nature. Nature don't let her play with her. You need to follow the rules of nature. And you can't fix irrigation if you don't fix soil health first. Because
it's all interconnected.
All interconnected, yeah. So we've got a number of aspects in our regenerative agriculture program, depending on if you're a dairy farmer or a fruit farmer or both. You can have both on the farm. So how do we connect those natural resources that you have on the farm, that we can farm the farm as an ecosystem, not as a factory?
Wow. Okay, so if I have no context, how do you fit in? Who is Kobus Pienaar?
I'm a soil scientist by trade. That was my first job, and I had the privilege to work in the input industry, selling fertilizers and chemicals when I was young. Then
How
I
does
worked.
one get into that? Like, I don't think I've ever heard of that, career. Like, you couldn't have been 6 years old and says, I get it, I want to be a soil scientist.
It's it's a very good question. It's when I grew up on the farm, I was always in the soil. I loved the soil. I even ate the soil. So my mom was horrified.
I think we all did.
And as I grew older, I had the privilege to have a father that really looked after his soil.
Yeah.
And we could see the crops that he's producing and that care he had in terms of the overall health of the farm. So with the little knowledge that he had at his disposal at that stage. So when you got into your grade 10, 11 years, now you need to decide what your career is. And the first thing that came into my mind, I want to fix soil. I want to work with soil. So I went to study soil at Free State University. So, yeah.
Wow. I mean, I always get so, I don't know, comfortable when I hear about these careers that I didn't even think existed, because you're sort of like the unsung heroes, because we have to care about soil. It's like almost everything that we ultimately feed our bodies with comes from the soil. And yet it's the last thing like a regular person thinks about. So, thank you for doing the good work. Now, I know that very little, first to start, I know very little about like regenerative agriculture, but I do know that there are 6 principles that it sort of like centers around. And I'm going to like try and pretend as if I know something by giving them to you, and you'd correct me where I'm right and wrong. 1, you're supposed to care about the health of the soil. 2, you're supposed to change the product you're planting or have like diversity. Correct. 3, you're meant to cover the soil so like there's no evaporation.
Yes.
4, you're supposed to... I think I'm running out.
You're an expert.
You're doing really well.
You need to look at, let's look at a forest. Forest is in nature the furthest developed. So they call it a climax environment. So those massive trees didn't grow there from small, and there was nothing else to protect them. So there's a hierarchy in nature that you need to follow. So to get to a forest, how do you get there? A forest soil is always covered with multiple species. Yeah. And a big tree like the one in National Forest uses a lot of nutrients, and nobody applies it to that tree. So how that tree gets its that diversity of species around it, the soil is covered, and nobody takes away more than what the forest can give back. Yeah. It's that balance that you need to find. And that's what we need to find in agriculture. So,
wow. So I kind of feel like, I've always been a fan of Woolworths. So I shop my groceries from Woolworths. I've never shopped anywhere else besides Woolworths. And I blame my parents for that, because when I finished studying, they gave me a Woolworths card, because they were like, we think he might not be able to feed himself. So just to make sure he doesn't starve. So then I just started like shopping from there. And there was always this culture of like farm to table. And I guess for you come before that process. You are like, I don't know, seed to shelf, I guess, that part. And going back to what really concerns the consumer, which is the farm to table part of it, on Woolworths side, so now Kobus has looked after the soil. How do you make sure that the produce that goes on to there is actually sustainable for real, or it's just like, window dressing? Because I think because it's such a trend at the moment, it's very easy to sort of say, oh, this is organic, and now there's been so many sort of like ways of describing things as sustainable or organic that it confuses the consumer. How do we know that it's legitimate, that it's real?
So it's a very good question, and I think I just got to call it, I already like your parents, right? They gave you the right card to start life with.
Yeah,
so and then so thank you for the patronage as well, right? And long may that continue. So from our side, I think what's quite important is the fact that as a brand, right, let me just start there, whatever we do is purposeful, and it's always centered around the legacy around quality, okay, the legacy around trust, and the legacy around integrity. So the things that we do, we don't only self-assess. We have third-party individuals that come in and that come and do that assessment, right? And so there is chemical analysis that we do to have oversight. There's very specific things that the farmers or the manufacturers needs to do in terms of brand integrity. There's third-party audits, then there's legislation, there's oversight, there's policies, and the sum or the culmination of all of that that's put together in a very proactive, targeted approach is what gives us and should give you that level of comfort that what you're buying is exactly what you're buying. And when we say there is audits that gets done or analysis, it doesn't mean that we necessarily tell you when that's going to happen. So it's ad hoc. And so we expect our supplier partner or our manufacturer to follow what they do 365 days of the year, 24 hours of the day, if that's what they're doing in terms of manufacturing, growing or planting, right? So there is a number of oversights. I often say that I wish people knew the amount of checks, balances, quality checks that we do across our entire value chain. So you've spoken about the farm, right? Talk about the table. But in the farm, Kobus will tell you there is water analysis, soil analysis, there's a number of things. And within those analysis, there's a number of trends, insights that you look at. And like Kobus spoke about the fact that it's outcomes-based. So whatever support, advice, guidance that we give comes from experts, and it's really based on the ecosystem on the farm per se. And then there's the bit around from the farmer right through to the packing, washing, etc., prepping, and then right into the store, into the distribution center, into the truck. There's a number of temperature checks that we do to make sure that whatever you get is at the best quality possible.
So is that to say, basically, I should be okay with paying a little bit extra for my broccoli because it's gone through the rigorous Woolworths standard of testing to make sure it's good?
Well, when we talk about value, right, is really what you get versus what you give up, right? So what we try and do is we try and do it at the best value possible, not necessarily because of what we do, we load it with price. Right? So yeah, if you're going to do extra checks for the right reason, those things cost money.
You
right?
had me at value, so I'm already, yeah. So I think understanding the fact that like every partner or manufacturer that has to partner with Woolworths has to sort of adopt some version of like focus on the future of farming. Does that mean every farmer that you partner with has to basically be using the regenerative method of farming?
Well, yes, the answer is yes, but it is a journey, Seth.
Okay, so not all of them have been turned into regenerative farmers yet.
Well, it's a process. So we start the program with you. We look at what's happening on your farm so that we can get at least some sort of baseline. Yeah. And then we start the journey in terms of prioritizing what's important. What are the things from a priority perspective that we want the supplier partner to do, and then we manage that process over time to ensure that there's a continuous improvement and evolution.
Okay. And so now, does this not make it sort of a little bit preventative for new farmers or partners to get involved? Because I understand changing into sustainable practices is very difficult and expensive for the farmer because you have to now use certain types of fertilizers that might be more organic or sustainable, whatever those terms mean. And they usually cost more than what we were using that is just chemical based in the past. So it's usually quite like a cost intensive, change for the farmer. Why would a farmer want to go on that journey?
It is absolutely true. I mean, it's a very good question. And that's the crux of the challenges you have in sustainability. It is when you make that changeover. So if you want to do the responsible thing, you need to understand you need to pay for the damage you've done. If I don't look at my health, I decide today I want to look at my health, I'm not fine tomorrow. I need to go to the doctor, I need to change my diet, I need to change my lifestyle, I need to change a lot of things, and that costs money. So, and the sooner we do it, the better. Like I said, we don't have much time. So, but in the long run, and we've got multiple case studies where it shows, in the long run, it's actually cheaper. Because if you give too much of an input into your soil, it's costly. If you give too little, you're actually taking away from the soil. So you're making your soil like bare. So it's finding that balance, but the trick of it is not to overrun yourself. Take it slowly, take it step by step, and make sure
You do the right thing first and make sure that in that transition period, your cash flow is healthy enough to carry you through. The danger is if you see the light and now and you're going to change everything. That's very dangerous. So and that's why we use science. It identifies where's that critical aspect that we need to address first and how are we going to address it. That's the important thing. And then from there on, we take it step by step. That's why, like Latiefa says, it's a journey. You don't wake up tomorrow and I'm a regenerative agriculture farming. It's not like that.
And Seth, maybe just to also add, our regenerative agriculture program is not a barrier to trade. So when we get into a relationship with any supplier farmer, it's really based on a number of prerequisites. And I think the most important is, do we share the same values, right? And then like any relationship, there's a measure of trust and it's got to be symbiotic. So to Kobus's point, when we scale and we implement this program, it's over time. It's not an all or nothing. And you've got to make sure it makes financial sense at the end of the day. So it really is a process and a step-by-step transition.
No, I absolutely agree. But Kobus, from the farmer's point of view, would a farmer want to engage in this because it's financially going to be lucrative in the long run because they get to work with Woolworths, or because innately they care about the sustainable practice that comes with it? I mean, one has to trump the other, and which one is it?
Yes, you touched on something that's very important in our Farming for the Future program. You have to meet the farmers where they're at. If you come from a top-down approach, you'll never get the results. You need to understand what makes them tick. And all farmers that I've met in my life, and I have met a lot of them, is in their heart is actually a steward of the land. That's what they want. They don't want to see their farm going backwards. But a farmer is faced with a lot of challenges and a lot of information that comes in. So we help them to distinguish between noise and information, that they can do the right step. And you know what? In all new programs, when we started with Farming for the Future, you just need that one farmer that gets it. And then you get the other farmers to talk to that farmer. When a farmer listens to a farmer, and that's our approach. We've got a number of what we call ambassador farmers in the program. And they talk to the other farmers, what it meant for them on their farm. And yet I have to find a farmer in our supplier base that's against the principle of Farming for the Future. Oh yes, we've got a lot of debate on the nitty-gritty and the aspects that we want to tackle. But the philosophy of Farming for the Future, they all get it. So it is how you approach them in that first instance when you meet them. That first impression. And that's the important thing.
And I guess that question does apply to you, Woolworths, as well, because there are sort of costs that will come with this practice, and some of it will have to be transferred to consumer. Asking from a consumer's point of view, why should I care on a micro and a macro scale about regenerative farming? Like, how do I benefit at an individual level, and what is then on a macro scale sort of like good for society?
So that is a really awesome question, because often as consumers, we think if it's going to cost me more, why should I bother? Yeah. But as individuals, nobody wakes up on a daily basis and think, I'm going to destroy the planet, right? Or I'm not going to do the right thing. I think innately we all wake up every day and think we're going to be better humans. So it's philosophical, right? We are in a time whereby we know we've got to reverse the impacts on this earth, right? There's water shortages, there is famine, there's a number of things that we see locally and globally. And so some of the benefits on Farming for the Future as an individual, right? I know that when I buy the product, that I would have thought about the impact on water. I would have thought about reducing the carbon footprint. I'm getting a better quality product, but with far less waste, right? Far less pesticide inputs. So when I think about the holistic impact on the ecosystem within that context, it's really a no-brainer. And we need to share the word in saying that we have to purchase responsibly. And the more we do and encourage each other to do that for the right reasons, right, the more we can make this collective change in terms of reducing the impact that we have as humans on this earth.
Now, I feel one of the parts that is done really well when it comes to sustainability is fashion. So I think at this point it's well publicized and documented that like fashion is a big contributor to, you know, the slow death of the planet. And so the regular person on the street is aware of certain things they should do, maybe buy less fast fashion and things like that. On the food front, it's probably not as publicized because I think there's an assumption that if I'm eating a vegetable, of course it's healthy. And I guess what you're doing now is showing us that there are degrees of how healthy, both for myself and my body and also for the environment. What are you doing then as Woolworths to sort of disseminate this message to make sure that it does actually reach the regular person?
Well, we've just been on this journey of where we sort of relaunching our regenerative program. And I think the one thing we want to call out is that we've been on this journey for the last 15 years. And it's not been a journey that's been stagnant. Even the program itself, where we started and how it has evolved over the years, we take into consideration our impact. How can we fine-tune value, right? How can we extract cost as far as possible for the right reason? There's a number of things that we look at. How do we look at the social aspects? How do we take that into consideration in this regenerative agriculture program? But as a consumer, some of the things that we want to encourage you from a sustainability perspective is to really look at when you buy responsibly. Look at recycling your waste as far as possible. Look at recycling your packaging as far as possible. So there's a number of those things that you can do. We obviously try and amplify the things that we do on the farm, like wastewater treatment, etc. Even your water at home, right? As a responsible consumer, can you rework some of that water in a way that allows you to actually use wastewater more responsibly and it doesn't just go down the drain?
I mean, I still think that there should be a way to make, you know, information about sustainability or, you know, more of the message of regenerative farming become more viral, because I think nowadays, you know, the attention span is so low that people learn things by seeing them repeatedly in small chunks of like 10-second clips. And I think we need to find a way of doing that. But I understand that there's an app where you have engaged with sort of teaching this. Like, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we've got some really clever marketing colleagues. Yeah. And they've looked at some of the aspects of AI in sort of designing in a really amazing way what farming regenerative agriculture is, and how do we sort of look at the agro ecosystem, and how do we look at what happens on top of the soil, what happens below the soil, and making sure that what we do in a way gives us that balance in terms of the ecosystem. At the same time, to your point is, we've got information on our website. We share some food for thought on our packaging in terms of our produce. We've got in-store banners. And then like individuals like yourself, right, taking the word out and sort of the gravitas and the amount of followers that you have, and just sharing that, what we do, and doing that on a continuous basis. Absolutely. And that,
yeah, like it does bring in the sense of transparency, which I guess is what you need, because again, we eat food every day. It's almost like an unconscious thing, and yet there's so much that we don't know in terms of the levels. Like even for me, who pretends to be like well-read, I knew very little about like the science of soil. So to think that there's a whole sort of career around that, and I think a regular person still probably doesn't get how much work has to happen in the background. And I think the more we can sort of do that, is going to be really impactful. I know that I'm lucky enough that I get to go on a farm tour in a few days. But for someone who's not able to have that level of access, but also still shops at Woolworths, too lazy to read the packaging, what else can they do to like be shaken up to just say, oh, actually, I should care about this?
I think it starts with creating that movement. Yeah. And we hope that we have created that movement. It's making sure that we keep that movement alive. So what else can you do? I think one, purchase up. Two, talk to the young ones around you, because it really starts, they are the next level of leaders and change makers in this world. We're partnering with 2 schools at the moment in terms of how we start bringing in farming for the future as part of their curriculum, but practically, right?
That's really looking at the future.
Absolutely. And so how do we teach farming in a smaller scale and also then amplify food security? Because nowadays there's a buzz around how can you grow things in a small space. So how do we actually start creating that movement, creating seeds, trying our hand at planting things? Because only through that practical application process will you actually start enhancing your knowledge, right? So that's another way of doing that. And then just give yourself time every day to learn 1 or 2 salient facts in terms of how you can actually save the planet.
I think if everyone at this point is aware of the fact that like anything that we can do as an individual does sort of add up to the impact, instead of being despondent that everything doesn't really sort of like amount to my gift. What can I do by myself?
So when Latiefa says talk to the young ones, you also need to understand in agriculture in South Africa, we've got a unique situation there. So how do you get young people into farming? Our farmers are getting basically older and they're getting less. So how do we get new people into farming? So we've partnered with SPEAR and the Sustainability Institute, where we have 20 students a year, where we take them in their practical year, the last year that they want to do BA or their diploma. We take them through the business of farming. What does it mean when you farm? How do you approach your soil, your irrigation? And how do you connect with your end customer? We still have too many farmers in South Africa that plant something, how they're going to sell it. That doesn't work like that in business. So we connect them to the business of farming and then do their practical, and it's really working well. And we've got a very good team and partners like SPEAR and the Sustainability Institute, and they help us with that.
Really? But how can people find out about that? Do you approach schools where people are learning agriculture, or how do they know about the program?
Yeah, it's in 2 areas. Like Latiefa says, we've got developed a module that schools implementing, and they use basic farming science in their current curriculum. So it's not that we have an on-top subject, farming is here, now they're going to do science. How does science work in farming? How does biology work in farming? When they do economics, how does that work in farming? So we infiltrate basically the current curriculum and that in schools. And then secondly is we engage with universities and colleges to get students that's willing to come and do their practical year on our farm. We wish we can accommodate 1 million of them, but...
Are you finding there's a huge amount of interest?
In the start, it was very slow, but now there's quite a huge amount of interest, and maybe we can invite you to Living Soils.
Let's try it.
It's really something. And we're also learning. The young people teach you more than you teach them. They show you where's your gaps. They're very intelligent and they're very sharp. So it's an amazing journey that we had in the last 3-4 years with that project, and hopefully we can roll it out to the rest of the country.
Incredible. No, actually, I think what you touched on there about like looking at the future and trying to get younger farmers. I was thinking the other day that like all the studies that I ever read about farming for the future are always so gloom and doom. It's always like the fear of like South Africa is running out of rain, it's getting drier. You know, like it's all very like unsexy stuff. And I think that for a younger person, it's like, oh, why would I enter a career that's already, doomed to sort of fail? And to know that there's actually interest from the youngsters is really encouraging.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, you need to be careful not to put yourself in a negative space. I mean, we're all here, we've got all a brain, and we can make the best of what we have here in South Africa. We've got unbelievable potential.
Yeah.
So, yes, we need to take in consideration some areas is getting drier and hotter. But what are we going to do? How are we going to adapt to that? And what can we do in a bigger scale to prevent it?
Yeah. But I mean, just like without turning into a science lesson, with the dryness, for instance, one of the core principles for regenerative farming is cover the soil. Does that literally mean you use like those greenhouse methods where you have the coverings on the soil? What does that actually mean in conjunction to less rainfall?
Again, in the context of the farm and the crop that you grow, one needs to be careful to just put up plastic. It also can have a negative effect. And that's where we use the science. What is the end result? What's the outcome of this farm? So when you use your high-tech farm, as we call it, that's your cover crop, your undercover farming, you can save a lot of water, you can use more tonnage, but it also have other negatives. Like you can't put it in the middle of an area where tourism is quite big for the income of a community, because it's actually ugly, to be honest. You know, those plastic types.
If that's the only drawback, why don't we just paint beautiful things outside the plastic?
Then there's light, and it goes through the plastic. Yeah. But it's about getting that root cause analysis by that you understand where the problem comes from. So, and also we've got a lot of opportunity in South Africa to save water, just by implementing basic tactics. Like you said in the start, evaporation is one of our biggest users of water. We've got a dry and hot country in comparison to other countries. So how do you
Good for tanning, but not.
No, definitely. But how do you stop that evaporation from the soil? And that's when you cover it. It's not always possible. I mean, when you grow lettuce, for instance, but for that period, we'll excuse you. But for the rest, you can't leave that soil bare. It's put in a crop that covers it and protects it from the wind and the sun. It also brings in organic material into the soil, so you build the soil. There's a value to it, and that's how we approach water. When you irrigate, measure what you irrigate. Understand how much the crop actually needs. Understand what is the demand on moisture from that crop, and then you give accordingly.
What's the smallest size a farmer can be to apply to be part of like the Woolworths supply on a regenerative sort of like scale?
That's a very interesting question. It depends what you farm with. You farm with
Latiefa told me there was no barrier to trade. So I'm hoping even the small guys can go.
You know, sound economics is actually a factor that you need to.
Absolutely.
So if you're a lamb farmer in Peru, you need 1,000 or 2 acres.
Okay.
But if you
I have no concept of how big or small that is.
it's so 1 hectare is 2 football fields. So you need about 4,000 football fields.
Oh no, yeah.
So that's big.
Yes, you have to start somewhere very far from the city.
Absolutely. And then,
Sorry, Latiefa. If you farm in an area like Stellenbosch, for instance, and you put up your cover growing for peppers and tomatoes, I mean, 2 or 3 hectares will do.
Okay.
So it depends on the economic scale of the crop and the situation that you need to grow.
Okay.
and
Don't be surprised when you see my application. I have, I think, 10 hectares of land, but it's in KZN, far from anything, so it's not really a economically viable piece of land.
well, it's actually I'm smiling at the question because, I mean, it's a very interesting lens that you've applied in terms of size of farm, right? And it's not just about whether you farm regenerative, it's really about the economy. Because if we have 100 people knocking on our door with a small farm that wants to supply, you've got to look after the farms, you've got to make sure the business is economically viable in the relationship, etc. So there's a number of things that needs to be considered when we actually bring the suppliers on board, right? But it definitely is not a barrier to trade, because we don't expect you to have regenerative agriculture implemented already when you come and see us. It would be awesome, because that means we've got less work to do. But yeah, it is a journey that we're happy to undertake for the right reasons, with the right partner.
I mean, I feel like you do so much work, and I think ultimately for you, you would love this work to translate into results where it is being adapted and it does, bring benefit to the consumer and ultimately to the environment. And I know that, like this year, for instance, McKinsey released a study where they found out that about 60% of like a general consumer who consumes at a mid to high end, like grocer, which Woolworths would be, 60% of them said that yes, they care about sustainability and that they would shop that way if the products were available. But if they look at the actual spend and the behavior, only 23% of the sustainable products were actually being shopped more in 2024. So there's a disconnect there. So people would like to think better of themselves, but they don't actually do it in the face of a recession and things like that. What do you think is the implication on the South African consumer and their sort of experience with buying organically or sustainably?
Affordability is always a challenge. Let's call that out, right? Food security is always at the top. People's got to eat. What we do as an organization, I'm going to look at it through that lens, is that we always try and give you the right product at the right value. And when I say the right value, we always look at ways in terms of where are the hotspots for waste. What are some of the things that we can improve in our supply chain, and how can we reinvest that into the product, right? And through looking at your data, your way of doing things, etc., because there's always better ways of improving. The more data insights that you get, the more you can actually become better at what you do. So that's a continuous cycle that we evolve on, and we have done that. I mean, we did a waste study on tender stem broccoli. There's a whole host of things that came to the fore in terms of how we could improve tender stem broccoli as a product. So affordability is a big thing, but we look at it holistically in terms of how can we actually review what we do on a daily basis to see if we can improve our value proposition. That's the first thing. The second thing is that our consumers expect us to do the right thing. They don't some of them, the consumer don't necessarily want to pay more, but she wants to know that you considered the ethical implications, the environmental implications, the social implications by virtue of the product that she's purchasing and the business that you're doing. And that's what we need to do.
Okay. I mean, which makes sense, I think, because they are, procuring, I don't want to say like a luxury product because it's still groceries, but like they are consuming a premium product by shopping at Woolworths. So I guess that is part of the expectation. But also at the bottom of it, do you find that people do actually go, keep their word? Do they buy the more sustainable thing? If there's a product and an alternate version of it that says like free range or whatever, do you find that a Woolworths customer will buy that one more than a non-labeled one?
Well, it really depends on the customer preference, right? And so in our journey in making sure we give you the best sustainable product, there's also understanding the customer insight.
Of course, yeah,
in
the
terms
limitation.
Of, absolutely, and what they want and what they want to purchase. So all of those insights are taken into consideration. And you will find that there'll be a customer that prefers free range, and then there will be people that will look at price and say it's slightly more expensive and therefore they wouldn't purchase. But then you have that customer that will not compromise on free range. And
they shouldn't be shopping at Woolworths.
and irrespective of the price, that's on top of, and it really depends on what is your internal value, what do you want in a product at the end of the day. Yeah. But to your question is, we really look at ensuring that we give the customer, based on insights, the choice in terms of what they want. And ideally, the utopia is giving her the best product with all of the credentials at the best value, so that everyone can actually buy into the product.
Cool. Like I hope one day we'll get to a point where I think it's the consumer informing the retailer to say, I want X, Y, Z, so that you don't have to be limited by working through the matrix of making it still affordable. You can basically just like say, Kobus, make us the most sustainable cauliflower, and it costs X, and you just put it on the shelf, and the consumer will buy it. But hey,
that's for the future, and that's what we're working towards. So thank you so much to you both.
You're very
You've
welcome.
educated me a lot, and hopefully anyone watching this will also feel like, I don't know, a little bit more transparency has been shared to make sure that we demystify this whole idea of farming for the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay.